You won't believe what happened to one of Kenya's biggest betting companies. A 26-year-old university dropout just pulled off the most audacious cyber heist in East African history. And it all started with a single admin who fell for the perfect trap. This is the shocking true story of Seth Mwabe, a man who called himself a cybersecurity researcher by day, but operated as a master hacker by night. What you're about to discover will blow your mind. How did a college dropout manage to steal 11.4 million shillings from Betika? How did he manipulate an inside admin to give him the keys to the kingdom? And why is this case sending shockwaves through Kenya's 500 billion shilling betting industry? Stay with me, because what happened next will change everything you think you know about cybersecurity. Meet Seth Mwabe Okwanyo, a 26-year-old who dropped out of Meru University but never dropped his ambitions. By day, he presented himself as a defender of the digital realm, a cybersecurity researcher dedicated to exposing vulnerabilities and protecting innocent users from cyber threats. But here's where it gets twisted. The very man who warned about cyber dangers was secretly becoming the most dangerous cybercriminal in Kenya. Mwabe lived in a luxurious apartment in Tatu City, one of Nairobi's most exclusive neighborhoods. His neighbors thought he was a successful tech entrepreneur. His social media showed a young man passionate about technology, posting about SQL injections, phishing scams, brute force attacks, and social engineering techniques. But that wasn't research. That was reconnaissance. Every vulnerability he studied, every weakness he exposed, every security flaw he documented was all preparation for the biggest heist of his life. And the target? Betika, one of Kenya's most trusted betting platforms, with millions of users and billions of shillings flowing through their systems daily. But here's the shocking truth that nobody saw coming. Mwabe didn't just hack into Betika's systems from the outside. Oh no, this was far more sinister than anyone imagined. Now here's where this story takes a dark turn that will leave you questioning everything. According to sources close to the investigation, Mwabe's success wasn't just about his coding skills. He had something far more powerful, something that would make any cybersecurity expert's blood run cold. He had an inside connection. Picture this. Somewhere within Betika's headquarters, an unsuspecting system administrator was going about their daily routine. This admin had access to the most sensitive parts of Betika's infrastructure, the kind of access that could open doors to millions of shillings. But that admin had no idea. They were being hunted. Mwabe didn't just stumble upon this opportunity. No! This was a calculated, methodical approach that would make even the most experienced con artists jealous. He studied human psychology. He understood the pressures that system administrators face, the overwhelming workloads, the constant demands, the split-second decisions they have to make daily. And then, he struck. Using advanced social engineering techniques, Mwabe began his psychological manipulation. He didn't need to break down firewalls. He didn't need to crack complex encryption. All he needed was to crack one human being. But that's not all. Wait till you see what happened next. The admin, overwhelmed by their responsibilities and possibly deceived by Mwabe's smooth-talking approach, made a fatal mistake. They either shared their credentials or opened a back door that gave Mwabe unprecedented access to Betika's most secure systems. Can you imagine the moment when this admin realized what they had done? The crushing weight of knowing that their trust, their simple human error, had just cost their company 11.4 million shillings? But how exactly did Mwabe pull this off? The methods he used will shock you to your core. Now let's dive deep into the technical nightmare that unfolded. What Mwabe did wasn't just hacking, it was digital artistry performed by a criminal mastermind. First, the phishing campaign. Mwabe created fraudulent application links that looked absolutely legitimate. These weren't amateur-hour fake websites. These were sophisticated replicas that could fool even experienced IT professionals. He distributed these malicious links through a Telegram bot, a platform that's incredibly difficult to trace. Think about the genius of this approach. Telegram's encryption and anonymity features meant that Mwabe could operate in the shadows, pulling strings like a puppet master while remaining completely invisible. But the phishing was just the beginning. Once he gained initial access, Mwabe deployed SQL injection attacks. For those who don't understand the technical details, imagine SQL injection as a way to speak directly to a company's database, bypassing all security measures and commanding it to reveal its deepest secrets. He accessed user accounts, he manipulated transaction records, he created fake betting histories, and most terrifyingly, he siphoned funds over several weeks without anyone noticing. 38 fraudulent transactions, each one perfectly crafted to avoid detection, each one stealing money right under the noses of Betika's security team. The investigators traced these transactions back to Mwabe's IP address. But by then, the damage was already done. 11.4 million shillings, approximately 88,000 US dollars, had vanished into the digital ether. But here's the most chilling part. This wasn't a one-time attack. Sources suggest that Mwabe may be connected to other fraudulent operations. The Betika heist might just be the tip of the iceberg. As we speak, investigators are diving deeper into his digital footprint. And what they're finding is terrifying. This young man didn't just stumble into cybercrime. He built an entire empire of digital deception. But the story gets even more dramatic because the investigation that followed was like something out of a Hollywood thriller. July 2024. Betika's financial monitoring systems detected something strange. Irregular transactions were flowing through their networks, patterns that didn't match normal user behavior, anomalies that sent red flags through their entire security infrastructure. The company's response was swift and decisive. They immediately reported the suspicious activity to the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, Kenya's elite law enforcement unit specializing in complex financial crimes. Enter the Banking Fraud Investigation Unit, a team of digital detectives whose job is to track down cybercriminals who think they can outsmart the system. These aren't your average police officers. These are tech-savvy investigators who understand the digital battlefield better than most hackers. For weeks, they conducted painstaking investigations. Every digital footprint, every IP address, every transaction log, every piece of metadata was carefully analyzed and cross-referenced. The investigation was like solving a massive digital puzzle. Each clue led to another. Each discovery revealed more of Mwabe's sophisticated operation. They traced his digital signature across multiple platforms. They analyzed his communication patterns. They mapped his financial networks. And slowly, piece by piece, they built an ironclad case against him. But Mwabe wasn't making it easy. He had covered his tracks well, using proxy servers, encrypted communications, and sophisticated money laundering techniques that would impress even seasoned financial criminals. The cat-and-mouse game between the investigators and Mwabe lasted for weeks. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he seemed to slip away into the digital darkness. But the investigators had one advantage that Mwabe didn't count on: human intelligence. While he was a master of digital manipulation, he underestimated the power of good old-fashioned detective work. They mapped his physical movements. They tracked his spending patterns. They identified his associates. And finally, they discovered his weakness: his luxury apartment in Tattoo City. Despite all his digital sophistication, Mwabe couldn't resist living the high life. The stolen millions had funded an extravagant lifestyle that ultimately became his downfall. But the moment of his capture, that's where this story becomes absolutely explosive. August 30th, 2025, a date that will forever be etched in the annals of Kenyan cybercrime history. Picture this scene: the exclusive Tattoo City neighborhood, where luxury apartments house some of Nairobi's most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders. The morning sun is casting long shadows across the manicured landscapes. Residents are starting their day, completely unaware that one of Kenya's most wanted cybercriminals is sleeping just meters away. Suddenly, the calm is shattered. Multiple police vehicles, officers from the Banking Fraud Investigation Unit, all converging on one specific apartment building. The precision of this operation was military-like. No detail was left to chance. No escape route was overlooked. Inside apartment number, well, the exact details remain classified for security reasons. But inside that apartment, Seth Mwabe was probably thinking he had gotten away with the perfect crime. Maybe he was counting his digital money. Maybe he was planning his next heist. Maybe he was simply enjoying the fruits of his illegal labor. But whatever he was doing, it all came to a crashing halt when those officers knocked on his door. Can you imagine the shock on his face? The moment when reality hit him like a freight train? The realization that his sophisticated digital fortress had finally been breached by good old-fashioned police work? The arrest was swift and decisive. No dramatic chase scenes. No Hollywood-style shootouts. Just the cold, hard reality of handcuffs clicking shut around the wrists of a man who thought he was untouchable. As the officers led him away, neighbors watched in stunned silence. The friendly young man they thought was a successful tech entrepreneur was actually one of Kenya's most dangerous cybercriminals. But the arrest was just the beginning. What happened in the courtroom would expose even more shocking details about this incredible case. September 1st, 2025. Milimani Law Courts. The stage was set for one of the most sensational cybercrime trials in Kenyan legal history. Senior Principal Magistrate Benmark Akubi presided over proceedings that would reveal the full scope of Mwabe's criminal empire. But what nobody expected was the defendant's shocking defense strategy. "I was testing new software," Mwabe declared with the confidence of a man who believed his own lies. "I'm a cybersecurity researcher. Everything I did was meant to expose vulnerabilities, not exploit them." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a man caught red-handed with 11.4 million shillings in stolen funds, trying to convince a court that he was actually doing Betika a favor by stealing their money. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They presented evidence that painted a very different picture. Evidence of a sophisticated criminal operation that went far beyond simple security testing. The court heard about the Telegram bot, the fraudulent application links, the 38 separate transactions, the months of planning, the social engineering of the inside admin, every detail more damning than the last. But here's where it gets even more dramatic. The prosecution revealed that this wasn't Mwabe's first rodeo. They suggested connections to other fraudulent operations, a pattern of behavior that showed this wasn't some innocent security research gone wrong. This was calculated, premeditated, criminal enterprise at its most sophisticated level. The magistrate faced a difficult decision. On one hand, they had a young man whose life could be destroyed by the full weight of the law. On the other hand, they had clear evidence of one of the most audacious cybercrimes in Kenyan history. Under Kenya's Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018, Mwabe faced up to 20 years in prison if convicted. 20 years! That's basically a life sentence for a crime that took only months to execute. The court granted the prosecution's request for additional detention time, 20 days for further investigation. And Mwabe would spend this time at Capitol Hill Police Station, probably contemplating how his brilliant plan had unraveled so spectacularly. But the legal drama was far from over, because what this case revealed about Kenya's betting industry sent shockwaves through the entire nation. The Mwabe case exposed something that industry insiders had been quietly worrying about for years. The betting industry's cybersecurity was built on a foundation of digital quicksand. Kenya's betting industry is worth over 500 billion shillings. That's an astronomical amount of money flowing through digital systems every single day. And if a 26-year-old university dropout could steal 11.4 million shillings, what could a team of professional cybercriminals accomplish? But here's the truly terrifying part. This wasn't Betika's first security scandal. In 2022, their own tech head was arrested for embezzlement. The very people trusted to protect the company's assets were stealing from within. The pattern was becoming clear. Kenya's betting industry wasn't just vulnerable to external attacks, it was being destroyed from the inside. Trusted employees, people with access to the most sensitive systems, were betraying their companies and their customers. Think about the implications. Millions of Kenyan bettors, people who trust these platforms with their personal data, their financial information, their hard-earned money, were completely exposed to sophisticated cybercriminals. The Mwabe case showed that even the most basic social engineering techniques could compromise entire systems. If one admin could be tricked into giving away access credentials, what about other companies? What about other admins? What about other systems? Industry experts began asking uncomfortable questions. How many other Seth Mwabes were out there? How many other inside jobs were happening right now, as we speak? How many other companies were hemorrhaging money to cyber criminals without even knowing it? The regulatory response was swift, but perhaps not swift enough. The Central Bank of Kenya, the Communications Authority, the Betting Control and Licensing Board, all scrambled to implement new security requirements. But the damage to consumer confidence was already done. How could ordinary Kenyans trust betting platforms when a university dropout could waltz in and steal millions? But the story gets even more complex when you consider the social factors that created Seth Mwabe in the first place. Here's the part of this story that nobody wants to talk about, but it's perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle. Seth Mwabe didn't emerge from a vacuum. He's a product of a much larger social crisis that's affecting an entire generation of young Kenyans. 35% of Kenyan university graduates struggle to find employment. Think about that statistic for a moment. More than 1 in 3 highly educated young people. People with the skills and intelligence to build the future can't find legitimate ways to use their talents. Mwabe dropped out of Meru University, but not because he lacked intelligence. His sophisticated understanding of cybersecurity, his ability to manipulate complex systems, his strategic thinking, these aren't the skills of an uneducated criminal. These are the skills of someone who could have been a valuable asset to Kenya's growing tech industry, someone who could have built legitimate cybersecurity companies, created jobs for others, contributed positively to society. But instead, he turned to crime. Why? The answer is both simple and heartbreaking. When legitimate opportunities don't exist, intelligent people create illegitimate ones. When the system fails young people find ways to beat the system. This isn't an excuse for what Mwabe did. Stealing is wrong, period. But it's an explanation for why cases like this keep happening. Kenya's tech industry is booming, but it's not creating enough opportunities for all the talented young people who could contribute to its growth. The gap between education and employment, between skills and opportunities, between dreams and reality, is creating a generation of potential cyber criminals. And here's the most tragic part. For every Seth Mwabe who gets caught, how many others are out there right now, using their intelligence for destructive purposes instead of constructive ones? The betting industry's vulnerability isn't just a technical problem. It's a social problem. It's a reflection of a society that's failing to channel young talent in positive directions. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more complex. The psychology of the inside job. Let's talk about the real victim in this story. The Betika admin who fell into Mwabe's trap. Imagine being that person right now. Imagine knowing that your mistake, your moment of weakness, your simple human error, cost your company 11.4 million shillings. Imagine facing your colleagues, your bosses, your family, knowing that you've been labeled as the inside connection to one of Kenya's biggest cyber crimes. But here's the thing, and this is crucial to understand. This admin wasn't a criminal. They weren't part of some elaborate conspiracy. They were a victim of psychological manipulation by a master manipulator. Social engineering isn't just about technical skills. It's about understanding human psychology. And Seth Mwabe clearly understood how to exploit human weaknesses. System administrators are under enormous pressure. They manage complex systems. They make hundreds of decisions every day. They're constantly dealing with urgent requests, emergency situations, and demanding deadlines. In that high-pressure environment, it's easy to make mistakes. It's easy to trust someone who seems knowledgeable, someone who speaks your technical language, someone who appears to be trying to help. Mwabe probably presented himself as a colleague, a fellow tech professional, maybe even someone from upper management. He might have created fake email accounts, forged digital signatures, or used other sophisticated deception techniques. The admin probably thought they were doing their job. They were helping a legitimate request from an authorized person. They had no way of knowing they were actually handing over the keys to the kingdom to a master criminal. This is why social engineering is so dangerous. It doesn't rely on breaking technical system. It relies on breaking human trust. And once that trust is broken, the consequences can be catastrophic. But here's what makes this even more tragic. This admin's career is probably over, even though they were a victim, even though they were manipulated, even though they had no criminal intent. They'll likely be held responsible for the security breach. That's the cruel irony of insider threats. The real insiders, the people who actually work for the company, often suffer more consequences than the actual criminals. And this brings us to perhaps the most important lesson from the entire Seth Mwabe case. The Seth Mwabe case isn't just about one criminal and one company. It's a wake-up call for an entire industry, an entire country, and frankly, an entire continent. Africa's digital transformation is happening at breakneck speed. Mobile money, online banking, digital betting, e-commerce, all growing exponentially. But this rapid growth is happening without adequate cybersecurity infrastructure. We're building digital economies on foundations that can't support them. We're creating massive pools of digital wealth without the security systems to protect them. The Mwabe case exposed these weaknesses in the most dramatic way possible. But for every successful attack that gets discovered, how many are happening right now without anyone knowing? Cybersecurity experts estimate that most cybercrimes go undetected for months or even years. Companies lose money, customers lose data, entire industries lose credibility, but the criminals remain invisible. This isn't just about betting companies. Banks, telecommunications companies, government agencies, educational institutions, healthcare systems, all are vulnerable to the same types of attacks that Seth Mwabe used against Betika. And here's the really scary part. Mwabe's techniques weren't even that sophisticated. He used basic social engineering, standard SQL injection attacks, common phishing techniques. If these basic attacks can steal 11.4 million shillings, what could advanced persistent threat actors accomplish? Nation-state hackers, international criminal organizations, terrorist groups, all have access to far more sophisticated tools and techniques than a university dropout working alone. The implications for national security are staggering. If critical infrastructure can be compromised by individual criminals, what happens when organized groups target essential services? But there's hope. The Mwabe case, as devastating as it was, has forced important conversations about cybersecurity that should have happened years ago. Companies are investing in better security training. Employees are learning to recognize social engineering attempts. Regulators are implementing stricter security requirements. Law enforcement agencies are developing better cybercrime investigation capabilities, but is it enough? And more importantly, is it fast enough? As this video is being made, Seth Mwabe's legal journey is far from over. The wheels of justice are still turning, and the final outcome will set important precedents for future cybercrime cases in Kenya. Under Kenya's Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018, the charges against Mwabe carry severe penalties, up to 20 years in prison, massive financial penalties, and permanent criminal records that would effectively end any hopes of legitimate employment in the tech industry. But here's where it gets complicated. Mwabe's defense strategy of claiming to be a cybersecurity researcher, while obviously false in this case, raises important questions about legitimate security research. How do we distinguish between criminal hacking and legitimate security testing? How do we protect researchers who discover vulnerabilities? How do we encourage responsible disclosure without criminalizing genuine security work? The legal system is struggling to keep up with the rapid evolution of cybercrime. Laws written years ago don't always fit the complex realities of modern digital crime. And then there's the question of prosecution resources. Cybercrime investigations are expensive, time-consuming, and require specialized expertise that many law enforcement agencies simply don't have. The Banking Fraud Investigation Unit did excellent work in the Mwabe case, but they're a small team dealing with a massive and growing problem. How many other cases are going unsolved simply because there aren't enough skilled investigators? International cooperation is another huge challenge. Cybercriminals operate across borders, but law enforcement agencies are still constrained by national boundaries and jurisdictional limitations. Mwabe operated primarily within Kenya. But what about criminals who route their attacks through multiple countries? What about those who use international money laundering networks? What about those who hide behind the anonymity of cryptocurrency? The legal framework needs to evolve, and it needs to evolve fast. Because while we're debating legal technicalities, criminals like Seth Mwabe are developing new attack methods and targeting new victims. But perhaps the most important legal question is this. What about the victims? What about the customers whose data was compromised? What about the company that lost millions? What about the admin who was manipulated? What compensation do they receive? Civil lawsuits, insurance claims, regulatory penalties? The financial consequences of cyber crimes extend far beyond the criminal penalties faced by the perpetrators. Behind every statistic, behind every news headline, behind every court case, there are real human beings whose lives have been forever changed by cybercrime. Let's start with the most obvious victim, Betika itself. Losing 11.4 million shillings isn't just about money, though that's obviously significant. It's about reputation, trust, customer confidence, competitive advantage, all damaged by one criminal's actions. How many customers stopped using Betika after news of the hack broke? How many potential customers chose competitors instead? How much did the company spend on additional security measures? Legal fees? Public relations damage control? The financial impact of cybercrimes extends far beyond the initial theft. It creates ripple effects that can last for years. But what about the employees? The security team that failed to prevent the attack? The management team that had to explain the breach to shareholders? The customer service representatives who had to deal with angry customers? All of them faced professional and personal consequences. And then there's the admin who was manipulated. This person's career may be over, their reputation in the industry permanently damaged, their confidence shattered, their family possibly struggling with the financial and emotional consequences. Social engineering victims often suffer from severe psychological trauma. They blame themselves for being fooled. They lose trust in their own judgment. They become paranoid about future interactions. This admin will probably never fully recover from the experience. Every future job interview, every new colleague, every security incident will remind them of their role in the Betika breach. But let's not forget about the broader community of Betika customers. Their personal data was potentially compromised, their financial information exposed to criminals, their trust in digital betting platforms permanently damaged. Some customers may have lost money directly. Others may have faced identity theft or other secondary crimes. The full extent of customer impact may never be known. And what about other potential victims? How many companies are now spending millions on cybersecurity improvements because of fear sparked by the Mwabe case? How many IT professionals are losing sleep worrying about social engineering attacks? The fear and uncertainty created by high-profile cybercrimes can be just as damaging as the crimes themselves. But perhaps the most tragic human cost is the waste of potential. Seth Mwabe clearly had tremendous technical abilities. In a different world, with different opportunities, he could have been a force for good in the cybersecurity industry. Instead, he's facing 20 years in prison, his talents wasted, his potential destroyed, his future eliminated by his own poor choices. So what can we learn from the Seth Mwabe case? What lessons can individuals, companies, and society as a whole take from this devastating cybercrime? First, and most importantly, human beings are always the weakest link in any security system. No amount of technical sophistication can protect against well-executed social engineering attacks. Companies must invest in comprehensive security training that goes beyond technical measures to address human psychology and behavior. Every employee, from the CEO to the newest intern, needs to understand how social engineering works. They need to recognize manipulation techniques. They need to know when to be suspicious. They need to understand that criminals will use trust and helpfulness against them. Second, insider threats are real and devastating. Companies can't just focus on external attacks. They need to implement robust internal security measures, background checks, access controls, monitoring systems, regular audits. All are essential for protecting against insider threats. But here's the crucial point. These measures must be balanced against employee privacy and dignity. Creating a culture of suspicion and surveillance can be just as damaging as being too trusting. Third, the rapid growth of digital economies must be matched by corresponding investments in cybersecurity infrastructure. We can't build billion-shilling industries on inadequate security foundations. This isn't just about individual companies protecting themselves. It's about creating industry-wide standards, regulatory frameworks, and collaborative defense mechanisms. Fourth, law enforcement agencies need more resources and better training for cybercrime investigations. The Banking Fraud Investigation Unit did excellent work in the Mwabe case, but they're fighting a much larger battle with limited resources. Fifth, we need to address the social conditions that create cybercriminals in the first place. Youth unemployment, educational gaps, lack of legitimate opportunities, all contribute to the problem. Investing in education, job creation, entrepreneurship programs, and legitimate tech opportunities is just as important as investing in cybersecurity systems. Sixth, international cooperation is essential. Cybercrime doesn't respect borders, so our response can't be limited by jurisdictional boundaries. We need better information sharing, coordinated investigations, harmonized legal frameworks, and joint enforcement actions. But perhaps most importantly, we need to change our mindset about cybersecurity. It's not just a technical problem to be solved by IT departments. It's a fundamental business risk that requires attention from the highest levels of management. The Seth Mwabe case marks a turning point in Kenya's cybersecurity landscape. The days of treating cyber threats as theoretical risks are over. These threats are real, immediate, and devastating. So what does the future hold? First, we can expect much stronger regulatory requirements. The Central Bank of Kenya, the Communications Authority, and other regulatory bodies are already implementing new cybersecurity standards. Companies that fail to meet these standards will face severe penalties. Second, cyber insurance is about to become essential. Companies can no longer afford to self-insure against cyber risks. Specialized insurance products that cover data breaches, business interruption, legal costs, and reputation damage will become standard business requirements. Third, cybersecurity will become a major competitive advantage. Companies that can demonstrate superior security will attract customers, investors, and partners. Those that can't will lose market share. Fourth, we'll see the emergence of specialized cybersecurity companies serving the Kenyan market. Local expertise, understanding of local threats, and proximity to clients will become increasingly valuable. Fifth, cybersecurity education will be integrated into all levels of the educational system, from primary school digital literacy programs to university cybersecurity degrees. The next generation of Kenyans will be much better prepared to deal with cyber threats. Sixth, artificial intelligence and machine learning will revolutionize threat detection and response. Systems that can identify unusual patterns, predict attacks, and respond automatically will become standard. But here's the most important prediction. The criminals will evolve too. As our defenses get stronger, their attacks will become more sophisticated. The Seth Mwabe case may seem primitive compared to the cybercrimes of the future. We're entering an era of cyber warfare where the stakes keep getting higher. Nation-states, terrorist organizations, and international criminal syndicates are all developing advanced cyber capabilities. Kenya's digital transformation is accelerating, but so are the threats. The question is, can we build our defenses fast enough to stay ahead of the attackers? The answer depends on choices we make right now. Do we learn from the Seth Mwabe case and take cybersecurity seriously? Or do we wait for the next devastating attack to force our hand? While we've been focused on the Seth Mwabe case and its impact on Kenya, it's important to understand that this isn't just a Kenyan problem. Cybercrime is a global epidemic that's affecting every country, every industry, and every aspect of modern life. According to recent estimates, global cybercrime damages will exceed $10 trillion annually by 2025. That's more than the GDP of most countries. It's a staggering amount of wealth being stolen, destroyed, or diverted by criminal activities. And the techniques that Mwabe used, social engineering, phishing, SQL injection, these are being used by criminals worldwide. The attack vectors are universal, even if the specific targets and contexts vary. In the United States, similar betting and gaming companies have lost hundreds of millions of dollars to cybercriminals. In Europe, sophisticated criminal organizations are targeting financial institutions with advanced, persistent threat campaigns. In Asia, nation-state actors are conducting cyber espionage operations that dwarf anything we've seen in Kenya. But here's what's particularly concerning. Developing economies like Kenya are often the most vulnerable. We have rapidly growing digital infrastructures, but without the mature security ecosystems that exist in developed countries. We're attractive targets because we have significant digital wealth, but limited defensive capabilities. We're like newly rich individuals who haven't yet learned to protect their wealth from sophisticated criminals. International criminal organizations understand this vulnerability. They're specifically targeting African countries, Latin American countries, Asian countries, anywhere they can find valuable digital assets with inadequate protection. The Seth Mwabe case, as devastating as it was for Betika, is actually small compared to some international cybercrimes. Individual attacks have stolen hundreds of millions of dollars. Some have disrupted entire national infrastructures. But there's also hope in the international dimension. Countries that have faced similar challenges are sharing their experiences, their technologies, and their expertise. International organizations, development banks, and technology companies are investing in cybersecurity capacity, building in developing countries. Training programs, technology transfers, and financial support are helping countries like Kenya build stronger defenses. The key is learning from global best practices while adapting them to local contexts. What works in Silicon Valley might not work in Nairobi, but the fundamental principles of cybersecurity are universal. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Seth Mwabe case is how it demonstrates both the power and the limitations of current cybersecurity technology. On one hand, Mwabe was able to execute a sophisticated multi-stage attack using relatively basic tools and techniques. His success shows that even advanced systems can be vulnerable to well-planned attacks. On the other hand, he was ultimately caught because digital systems create permanent records that skilled investigators can follow. Every transaction, every login, every communication leaves digital fingerprints that can be traced back to the source. But technology is evolving rapidly on both sides of this equation. Criminals are developing more sophisticated tools, but so are the defenders. Artificial intelligence is revolutionizing cybersecurity. Machine learning algorithms can analyze millions of transactions in real time, identifying patterns that human analysts would never notice. They can detect anomalies, predict attacks, and respond automatically. Behavioral analysis technology can create detailed profiles of normal user behavior, making it much easier to spot when accounts are being used by unauthorized individuals. Blockchain technology offers new approaches to secure transactions and identity verification. While not perfect, it can make certain types of fraud much more difficult. Quantum computing, still,